Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much, Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, for giving me this opportunity to present this study. Firstly, this is a very quick study which we had done. This is a very, is it audible now? Yes. This is a very quick study which we had done for Government of Karnataka Panchayati Raj Department, Rural Development Panchayati Raj Department. Actually, we did two studies. One was on the role of NREGA and financial inclusion, and the other was role of NREGA in improving land productivity, particularly with reference to the works undertaken on the individual lands. Now, to briefly give the context, the wage employment is one of the primary objectives of NREGA, but then I think, actually, if you look at the spirit of NREGA, it is the auxiliary objective, which is to provide improvement of the natural resources in the village or in the rural areas, which is, I think, actually is as important, but very often I think we lose sight of it, and I think the emphasis is more on wage employment and preventing or reducing the distress migration, which are important, no doubt. There is no doubt about them being important or them being primary. But then, if you look at the spirit of NREGA, it is also about creating a natural resources, regeneration, so to say, which will sustain the livelihoods of the people in the long run. Because if you look at the poor people in the villages, I think they're very intricately linked to availability of water firstly, which is water for irrigation, water for drinking, and then also the land for grasslands for grazing their animals. So their life is very intricately linked with the environment in which they live, and I think the degradation of this environment over a period due to overexploitation and inability of the environment to regenerate itself, I think has led to chronic poverty in many cases. If you look at the causes for chronic poverty, I think it is linked to the state of natural resources in these places. So, given that, I think the NREGA plays a very important role in trying to rebuild these resources so that there is there is an opportunity for this poor to eke out a livelihood in the long run. And come to think of it, NREGA is the only fund of the centrally sponsored schemes, which is the only one which is untied completely. Even a fund like the backward region grant fund comes up with a whole set of guidelines and ex-ante approvals. NREGA fund comes to a Gram Panchayat completely untied, and it is for Gram Panchayat to determine what works it would take up, and if those works are taken up in a manner where they integrate the works on the land, common lands, with those on the individual lands, it could make a complete difference, a transformation in that particular village. So here in this study, what we did was we tried to look at some of the issues related to land works in the individual lands. But so before that, I think, let me also mention that what I'm going to point out might seem a little demoralizing or dispiriting, because I think the findings are not, when you do particularly at a ground level, when you go and actually look at a situation in a particular Gram Panchayat, things are not always as rosy as they might seem from statistics, because which kind of average out all the issues. But various studies have already pointed out that land development works and NREGA works have actually led to a big difference in the livelihoods of the people, particularly in terms of making available the groundwater, recharging of the groundwater, or soil fertility, and then income generation from the improved lands. So there is no doubt about the fact that the NREGA land works have resulted in improved conditions for the poor. Various studies have pointed it out. There's a study which has been done by University of Agricultural Sciences in Karnataka, along with London School of Economics in Chitradurga, where they have also found that the works which have been undertaken on the individual lands have also resulted in the reduction of vulnerability of the people. When they took the vulnerability index, and they found that there was improvement in their vulnerability index. Similarly, studies in Tripura, studies in Kerala, studies in various other places have pointed to the fact that there is an improvement in the overall conditions of the poor with the land works. At the same time, there are also studies which point to the fact that these land works, if they are undertaken in a very unplanned manner or in indiscriminate manner, could also result in, the downside is that, you could have a long-term disastrous implications for that. Like, for instance, if you have water harvesting structures at a very high levels, they could probably impact the downstream areas. So the point that I'm trying to make is that there are 2 points. One is that it is very important that the land works are undertaken in a very planned manner, and then the individual land works that are undertaken are complementary to the ones which are undertaken in the common lands, because you cannot have an individual land work which are undertaken which does not mesh with the land works undertaken on the common lands. So this is the general scenario in which we had undertaken this study, and then, as you are aware, that right from the very beginning, the NRHA Act provided for works to be undertaken on individual lands as also on the common lands. But there is a reason for this, because very often the people who are seeking work under NRHA are seeking work because they are not able to work on their own land, which is no longer productive because it's either it's got a lot of boulders on it, or it may have become unproductive because the topsoil is gone. So, or it does not have proper irrigation facilities, within the area. So, the individual land works are intended such that when that individual land improves, the person is able to make a living by working on his own land, not depend on NRHA anymore. Or, in addition to NRHA, he could also earn make some living out of his own land. And while that individual land is being developed, he also gets engaged on that work, that individual land work, and thereby he also earns a wage in the process. So it's a kind of a situation where it is intended to help. But then the whole idea when it began was that this would be available only to the most vulnerable, the most marginalized people, SC, ST, and beneficiaries of Indira Awas Yojana. The main finding of this study is how over a period this criteria has been diluted, and then how the benefits are no longer accruing to the people for whom it was originally intended. That is what I think we would see going forward. So this study essentially is about looking at the implementation of this particular part of NREGA on ground. Actually visiting some Gram Panchayats and seeing it. So to understand what we did, I think it is important to also appreciate the conditions which are there, the preconditions which are there for undertaking land works on the individual lands. So one is, of course, you have, it is to be SC/ST works have to be taken on priority, and beneficiaries shall be a job card holder, and then projects have to be approved by Gram Sabha and so on. And then the rest of the conditions which apply to any NRHA work would also apply, like the 60-40 material, labor material proportion, and so on. So what we essentially were trying to do is to look at the individual land works and to what extent these have resulted in creating assets that improve the productivity of the land in long term and their beneficial impact on the condition of the beneficiary. And most importantly, looking at the compliance with the conditions attached to the particular provision in the Act. So the study was undertaken in 12-13, and then the works which we looked at, because we had to look at the completed works. The completed works works undertaken in 2009-10 and completed in that period. We looked at those works. So we did it in two districts which were selected actually by the government of Karnataka. And in each of the two districts we had selected two taluks. Taluk is a block. It's called taluk in Karnataka. And then these taluks were either most backward among all the taluks in the district or more backward than others. And then in each of those taluks we selected two gram panchayats. So we have about 8 gram panchayats. And the selection of gram panchayats was based on the fact that they had the largest number of, highest proportion of individual land works to total land works. That means these gram panchayats were the ones where the individual land works were higher, as a proportion to total works than other gram panchayats. And then in each of these gram panchayats, we selected 8 works. And these 8 works were selected randomly from the website, because the website lists all the works, and then we selected 8 works randomly. First number being selected randomly, thereafter every 8th work. So now these were so even the random selection resulted in about 50 works belong to others, SC, ST about 10, and then ST about 3. So even at the, you can see as it is, the proportion of the works which are undertaken for SC, ST are low. Even otherwise, even if you take the statewide statistics, they find that the works are of the proportion of about 10% for SC, and then about 15-20% for the ST. So the methodology involved. We first went to the gram panchayat. We looked at the sample work files. Each work has a file which starts from the time the work is identified. Actually, there is an application to be made by the beneficiary that he wants the work done, and then thereafter the work is technically estimated, then it is approved by the Gram Sabha. So there is a whole process for that, and then all those papers are expected to be filed in the sample work file. So we looked at those sample work files. From there we visited the fields where the works have been undertaken to witness evidence actually what works have undertaken. If there was a bund made or if there was a pond created, we went to see whether the pond did exist there. Because sometimes you have a lot of works which happen on paper but they don't exist there, so we actually went to evidence them. If there was a horticultural plantation, we looked at whether the same species existed there or not. Then we came back and then we interviewed the beneficiary about certain things as far as the procedures are concerned, and also whether he benefited from it in any manner. Then we also interviewed the Gram Panchayat representatives to understand their perspective on this entire issue as to how they view the individual land works and how they went about it and what is their understanding of the conditions and things like that. So this is the individual land works which were taken up in different districts, and then Belgaum is about 10.95% and Dharwad, this is, they are fairly, Dharwad is very low but then Belgaum is very high. So I'll come straight to the findings. One is, the first thing what we find is that the dilution of eligibility criteria provided an opportunity for others to take advantage of it. This is what, our study points to the fact that the criteria has been diluted over a period of time. I'll tell you how it has been done. And then secondly, what I think really from a governance point of view or from an administrative point of view, what I think should concern is that there is very little information available in the work files there. And the information which is very critical, like the very eligibility criteria on the basis of which the work is undertaken is just not available. Then of course the last point is there are very poor linkages with individual land development and the national resource management. Now if you see the way this criteria has been diluted or expanded, diluted is a value loaded word, maybe expanded over a period of time, was that initially it was only lands belonging to SC, ST and IAY beneficiaries, and then later BPL was added, and in 2009 small and marginal farmers were added, and then 2012 traditional forest dwellers were added. So the list of people who could benefit from this expanded over a period of time. And similarly, initially it was only provision of irrigation facility, then horticulture was added, then development of wasteland and other works also got added. What is important to note also is that horticulture is an important thing, which is which is of a different dimension, and we will see why it is. Now, if you see the share of land works for, 2012-13, this is the data which is available, secondary data. As I was mentioning, SC/STs formed about just 10%, and others were almost as much as 68%, 69%. In Belgaum, and then in Dharwad, they were as much as 77%, and even in the state as a whole, their percentage was fairly low at about 22%. The first point which we need to see here is that the social category is not mentioned in the work files in many cases. The social category is about SC/ST, or whether he is a marginal farmer or a small farmer. There has to be a document which supports that his particular claim to that category, which is just not available in the files in many cases. And the other problem is, like when you look at the website, the problem is that these categories are treated as mutually exclusive. A small farmer could be a BPL, a small farmer could be a SC, but then they are treated as mutually exclusive, so which becomes very difficult for us to look at how it is being targeted. So if you see the land holding, for instance, in the work files, about out of 63, we didn't get one work file. Out of 63, as many as 49 files did not have information regarding the land holding, and that's very critical information, because we are talking of developing the individual lands of persons who hold either who are very small farmers. So about 49 persons out of 63 didn't have that information given in the file at all. And even for those which has been given, you find that about almost 9 persons were large farmers. Holding 5 acres and more. So one is that the lack of transparency, because the information is simply not available. Two is there is also a targeting which has gone wrong, because there are people who hold larger land holdings and who are being given the benefit, possibly because they might have qualified under BPL, because BPL is again a very vague kind of a categorization where so there is a possibility that they may have got qualified under some other criteria. Then if you look at the works in Dharwad, all of them were horticulture works, and rose farms, coconut farms, and sapota, and all the kind of horticulture farms. And rose farms were a big thing there, because they had a ready market nearby town, Hubli, and then a lot of farmers took up to rose farming in Dharwad. And in Belgaum, most of the works related to this. So now, some of the things which they did not comply with, the conditions, as I said, the most important condition that was not complied with is about the landholding itself, that, or the information regarding the landholding or the social category itself was not complied. One of the conditions was that the beneficiary should be a job card holder. So 25 out of 63 did not have a job card. So if they did not have a job card, possibly they were not even eligible to begin with. 34 beneficiaries, only 34% of beneficiaries earned a wage. That is, it was required that a beneficiary should be also engaged on the land work. And there are so many other kind of, non-compliance with the conditions and procedures which we have seen, like there was no sanction in the files, there was no, most places there was, the beneficiary was not informed of the work. He learnt about the work only when the laborers landed up at his work site and then said, we want to work. So there was a whole lot of other non-compliances with that. So even the Gram Sabha sanction was also not present in any of the works. So we looked at the existence, most of them existed, and there were also issues about some of the plantations like banana and all that, they are harvested after 2 years, they don't, the plants, wither away, you need to replace it. So, but And then one was, of course, the coconut form which was there, which this again raises one issue. When you have horticulture, I'll just take 1 minute, sir. I'll take 1 minute. Horticulture, there is an issue is that one is that it amounts to more or less a material and labor subsidy because it doesn't really improve the condition of the land over a period, or it does not even improve the status of the farmer over a longer period because it requires replacement. Say whatever plantation you have, after a year or so, you really need to replace the saplings. You really need to rework the whole thing. And secondly, it also requires, there are certain conditions which need to be met for a horticultural plantation also to succeed. Like we have seen here that coconut was planted, but there was no technical support provided to the farmer, and there was no irrigation facility for some of the plantations. So as a result, what happened is whatever plantation they did withered away in no time, and they were just pits. We'll come back to your questions, sure. But then when we interviewed the individual farmers, then they did mention that, in many cases they found that the area under irrigation increased, or they kind of, cropped more often because they had better, income, and the yield levels also improved in some cases. I mean, just to conclude, that the low coverage of SC/ST beneficiaries under the individual land development, this is the very fundamental objective of the scheme. Mixing up social categories with the reform category and BPL kind of leads to very poor targeting. Poor maintenance of work files non-compliance makes the entire exercise non-transparent. And choice of works, particularly those relating to horticulture, show that larger purpose of improved natural resource management has been ignored. So, what I think are implications for policy is that there must be some compliance with the prescribed criteria, at least better monitoring, and then also there is a need for other departments to get involved with the overall natural resource management in the selection of land works and like that. Thank you.